name is Charles E. David. They call me Charlie David, and I'm 81 years old, and I'm a member at St. Martin de Porres, and we spend a lot of time as associate members at St. Louis Bertrand. So we between the two churches. This is a photo of my immediate family, and it's my soulmate, my wife Beverly, for 50, 54 years we going into that now, and my son Dominique, and then my youngest son Jock, and then my daughter Angelique. And when we were involved in all the activities, it was generally pretty difficult for us to find babysitters and so on. So they kind of were with us, followed us around on most all the activities that we were involved in, and so we're proud of him. Dominic is into systems. He calls it computer systems and stuff like that. He went to school down at Fisk in Nashville, and then he went up to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and then my daughter went to Fisk for 2 years, and then she went to Oberlin and graduated from Oberlin in 2 years, and then my son Jock went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and then he went to law school at Cornell University in New York. And we were average income people, but they started out early because of their foundation in the church and at St. Charles Montessori. Starting out, my wife put them in the St. Charles Montessori, and from there they went on to the schools and so on. And they received a lot of scholarships and so on. It was very helpful for us because we couldn't really afford it, but we were really proud of all three of them. I had one experience when I was at St. Peter Claver, where I was about the seventh, maybe the eighth grade, and I was looking for a summer job. And so I kind of mentioned that to one of the nuns that I was going to be. A lot of times the students would, during the summer, would kind of hang around the school, help clean classrooms and so on, because they didn't really have anything constructive to do other than just go to the community center and recreate. But I needed a summer job. I wanted to make a little money. I knew I was headed to high school and so on. And also because to relieve some of the pressure off of my father, who I had seven other kids behind me, and my older brother, and then myself, and then seven behind me. But anyway, one of the principal, I think it was Sister Cirilla was the principal at the time, Ursuline nun. She contacted the nuns out at Holy Spirit on Cannons Lane, which is a very affluent parish and so on. And I ended up with a summer job out there, and I was real grateful for it. I worked all summer. I helped the maintenance guy and the janitor cleaning up the classrooms and getting the church ready for different events, buffing floors and things like that. And it was a very good experience. So I'm saying that the nuns not only were concerned about your education, but they also helped a lot of the families and so on. So it was a good. After that, I graduated, and I think it was 52, and then I went on to the Catholic High School, which was located at 8th and Cedar, at about 200 students. And it was our pastor, Father Simon, was also kind of like one of the trustees at Catholic High. And the other trustees were Father Hines at St. Augustine and Father Bowling at St. Augustine. And so at St. Augustine, the nuns were Sisters of Charity. And of course, again, we at that point, we realized that even though we walked past St. X every day, which from Smoketown getting down to Catholic High, we were still like a minority within a minority, because Central at that time was at 8th and Chestnut. We were at 8th and Cedar, and Central was a big public school. And so our parents kind of like chose to make the sacrifice to encourage us to go to Catholic school, primarily because of the tradition of the church, and they thought we would get, the religious education and the guidance and so on. So for a lot of students, it was a big challenge because Central had a lot of additional programs. It was a bigger school. They had shops and so on. And so we did lose some students to Central. And but I graduated from Catholic High School in 1956, and we had small classes. I think it was about 30 in my 25 or 30 in my graduating class, and I think I was number 3 in the class. The two guys that got the scholarship got a scholarship to Bellarmine, but I was real close friends with them. And so when they had a certain day, they had to go out to Bellarmine to talk to the administrators and so on. And and they lived in West Louisville. I was in East Downtown. And they asked me if I wanted to ride out with them. So I told them yeah. And then so when I had a car, we drove out to Bellarmine, and we met the priests and everybody. They had their records. The nuns from Catholic High sent their records out, and I was just kind of along for the ride. And after they processed them in and told them how everything was going to work out and everything, I think it was one of the priests asked me what was I going to do. And I told him, I said, well, I'll probably go to the service, military, or may try to take some courses or something like that. And he said, well, you mind if we look at your record? We'll call back Sister James Teresa and asked to send your record. Would you mind? I said, no, you can do it. And, so they got my record. She sent it out, and they called me back in a few days and say, well, if you want to go to school, if you would like to go to school here, we'll give you a try, give you a semester try. And I said, okay. So my dad had already told us, and this was kind of like a general theme of his, you get 18 years old, you have to do something. You gotta get, once you graduate, you gotta get a job, or you gotta come up with some kind of plan in military or something, because I got all the other kids behind me. At that time, I had a couple of sisters going to Ursuline, and some of them still at St. Peter Claver and so on. But anyway, they told me that they were going to give me a semester try at the school. So my dad said, well, so I didn't really mention it to my father that I had been out there and they were going to give me a try at a semester at the school and so on. But he says, we're going to have our meeting. He said, we're going to meet just before, in August, right at the end of the summer. You and I, we're going to talk about your plan for the future. So, so I had gotten a couple of books, and I had shared it with my mother, and she was pretty excited and everything. And I had some paperwork to show that they were going to accept me in the school and so on. And so he said, what's your plan for the future? You just can't sit around here. So what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go to school. He said, where are you going to go to school at? And so I had choice of U of L, University of Louisville, Kentucky State. I said, I'm going to Bellarmine. He said, how are you going to go to Bellarmine? He said, they charge tuition out there. I said, well, they told me they're going to try me for a semester, and they offered me a job and stuff like that. And so I went out to Bellarmine, graduated, went out to Bellarmine, And I was pretty serious in my first semester and did really well. I probably ended up with probably a C plus, close to B average, and then I just kept rolling on from there. And I graduated from Bellarmine in it was probably 62, 63. I got a picture of myself where with the group. It was all men's college at the time, with no women there. And I finished 4 years and had to go to summer school. I had to take a philosophy course. I had an aunt lived in Cincinnati, so I went up to Xavier University and took a philosophy course and then transferred it back to Bellarmine. And while I was a student at Bellarmine, I was having financial difficulties. Again, the Franciscan priest, the financial director, Father Therese, Father Hargan, and the priests out there, they were real considerate. As long as you had decent grades, you could go in and argue your case with them. And but I ended up, they offered me a job cleaning classrooms after I took my classes and so on like that, and that worked out for maybe a semester or two. But they had me. I was cleaning classrooms from maybe like 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and then going to class. And I was getting sleepy in class, so I actually had to give it up. But I graduated. I finished my bachelor's in business administration, and went off and went to New York to visit some relatives, and then came back and graduated March with my class the following year. So and at Bellarmine again, I thought the Franciscan friars and all the staff out there were very sensitive to the needs of the students, and especially the African American students. A lot of the students out there had a lot of the students that came from Catholic High and Central. The basketball team was pretty much graduates from Central High School. Some of the big stars at Central High School, the ones that didn't leave town ended up out on Bellarmine's basketball team. So we had a pretty good representation of African Americans at that time at the school. So I graduated and went up to New York. Before I went to New York, I applied for a job with General Electric, which a lot of my classmates, which was right down the road. A lot of my classmates were getting jobs at General Electric. I applied at General Electric and really didn't hear anything too much from it. So then I kind of left and went up to New York and stayed with one of my aunts there for a while. And ended up from there, I went to, ended up in the military, got drafted. They asked me to report back to Fort Knox. And I ended up doing my basic at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Since I was in the New York area, they told me I could just report in up there. And I went to Vietnam, and was in the military for 3 years, spent about 5 or 6 months in Vietnam, and then ended up coming back home. And when I came back home, I was in the, worked with the post office, and I had applied for other jobs, and then I went to a job fair and submitted an application to General Electric, which I had applied for many years ago. And General Electric sent a guy to my house and asked if I would be interested in working for them. They had gone into affirmative action by that point. And he had called me, told me he had called me a number of times, and but I hadn't responded to him because I was busy working with the post office. I was glad to leave the post office because my dad also worked in the post office as a mail handler, And I had at that time I had just recently got married to my wife, and so I had this routine of whenever I accrued sick leave or annual leave, if I had enough of it, I would call in and stay home. She was new in town and everything, so we would run errands together and do different things. But just the whole thing of having your own apartment and stuff like that. So, and so in the post office, they would just go to my dad and say, "What happened to your son? Where's he at?" And then he would call me and says, "You don't you don't take off just because you accrue 3 hours of annual leave or vacation leave. You let it accumulate, you know." So he was always kind of policing me. They kind of went to him and he would come to me. And he said, if I said, "I had a headache today." He said, "Headache, you go to work on a headache. That's not anything serious, you know." So I was glad to leave and go to General Electric. I was in the military when I met my wife, and I was in it just ended up before I went to Vietnam. I was stationed in Fort Benning, Georgia, and my best buddies were from New Orleans, and we called ourselves homeboys, and we were all about the same size, and we wore each other's civilian clothes and so on. We were real close. So I invited them to come on the holidays. I did invite them to come to Louisville, and they invited me to go down to New Orleans. And so one of my buddies, they used to kind of ridicule me a lot. Not ridicule, but crack jokes because I would get up on Sundays and go to Mass. I'd get dressed in my Class A uniform or either my fatigues and go to Mass. So one of my buddies said to me, "We're going to hook you up with a girl. We know a girl who goes to Xavier University in New Orleans. And so you come down, and they were college guys too. And they went to Southern University in New Orleans. And so they were going to hook me up. And so I went down right around just around Thanksgiving or Christmas, I think it was, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I met they had like a little organization. It wasn't really an official organization club, but all the girls that was in this group ran together, and all the guys that they knew all kind of knew each other and ran together. And so they were going to introduce me to this girl's name was Maxine, and she was went to school at Xavier University. It was 4 or 5 girls I met at one time in the group, and of course it was 3 guys that from New Orleans that I was with, and so I never really got to meet her. That well, I couldn't remember meeting her, but anyway, I asked when we got back to the post. The guy said, "We tried to hook you up, but you don't say anything. You don't do anything." So anyway, I asked him about, well, what about the girl that really, she didn't say too much, but she looks this way and this and that. She said, "Oh, you're talking about Beverly Stewart." I said, "What about her?" So I just kind of like uh, became interested because of all the ones I met. She was the ones that didn't say anything, just was the quiet one in the group. So the next time, one of the guys went back home. And he told us that he's interested. He wants to know your name and this and that and so on. So I started corresponding with her, and then when I went down, my buddy took me over to her house. And when I went to her house, I thought I was in my house because her mother and father were about the same age as my mother and father, and they had 7 kids and we had 9 kids. And her mother was like, "Well, where are you staying at? Are you getting rest? Be careful when you do this. Have you eaten lunch?" And so like that. So it just kind of like felt like being at home. When I was in Vietnam, I kind of blanked the whole experience of meeting my wife out of my mind because I had to focus on what was in front of me. And it was, we were going out on basically what you call search and destroy operations and constantly moving. I was in a airborne artillery unit. And basically what I did was I did a lot of praying when I was there. When I had quiet time, free time, I would just pray that God, divine providence, would lead me to the right person get me through this experience in being in the war zone. And if I came out successfully, just lead me to the right person. And I couldn't really think about my wife. We had written a couple of letters to each other, and even with the letters, I couldn't write back to her because we were constantly moving and so on. And so, really, I had gotten called while I was there. I had gotten called up to battalion headquarters, and my company commander asked me why was I going. I told him I didn't really know, but they had my name. When I went to battalion, they sent me up to division headquarters where Westmoreland was, General Westmoreland. And they said, well, why are you up here and what are you coming up here for? And they said, well, we got you on a manifest going to Saigon, which is one of the main cities in, we call it Ho Chi Minh City now, I think. But it was Saigon at the time. When I got to Saigon, they said, well, you go up there, we think it's a mistake, but you go up there and see what's going on, and then you come on back to the unit. When I got to Saigon, they said that President Johnson is considering whether he is going to extend the guys in the service or whether he's going to let guys go home if your enlistment date is up. So I hadn't realized that I was approaching my enlistment date. My 3 years was coming up, and I hadn't realized it. And so I went up there and I spent about a month in Saigon and found out that Johnson made a decision that I could come home and so on. And shortly after I came home, I got to corresponding with my wife again. We got engaged, and then we had a big wedding down at St. Monica's Parish in New Orleans in June 18th, 1966. And my mother and father and my aunt and some of my sisters and brothers went down. We had a great time. And then from there we came back to Louisville and started our life. We stayed with my mother's for a short while, and then we got our first apartment. And of course, my mother lived 3 doors from it was then known as Holy Cross Parish. She lived 3 doors from the church on 32nd Street. So we got involved with the parish because we could do a number of things. We could go to Mass and then walk out of Mass and go right over to my mother's house on Sunday for breakfast and brunch and so on. So at the time we went to Holy Cross, the pastor was Father Bossing and Father Beaupert. And then the neighborhood was beginning to change. When we moved into the neighborhood, it was on 32nd Street. There was only one other African American family on it. A guy named Mr. Hayes lived 2 doors down from my mother. But the neighborhood was beginning to change, and the parish was beginning to change. And the people were saying that the people who were moving were saying that it was because of the Shawnee Expressway coming through, and there was going to be a lot of traffic noise and so on. And then, but anyway, over a period of time, the neighborhood changed, the population in the parish changed from white to African American. A little more and more people were moving sort of more or less out this way where I'm living now, toward Southwest, Shavely, Pleasure Ridge Park, Valley Station, and so on. But we got involved, at the time we started getting involved in the parish, we had two kids, with my son Dominic, my other son Jock, and my daughter, because they had stair steps. But Father Al Wilson was the pastor at the time, and he was there for a pretty good while, and then it was right in the period of time where the thrust of the civil rights era, where the idea of being black and proud and all of this came into play. And so Father Boniface Harden came to us and said, I understand y'all looking for an African American pastor. And we said, well, we would like to have one, And so he introduced us to Father Joseph Bell. And they went through a lot of changes with the Archbishop. I believe at that time it was McDonough. And went through a lot of changes with Archbishop McDonough. And finally, they signed Holy Cross Parish, which is St. Martin de Porres Parish, signed at that time. It was Holy Cross, but they signed a contract with the Benedictines for 5 years. And the Benedictines came in. There was Father Joseph Bell, Father William Reese, and Father Alvin Fung Ben. And so it was 3 priests there from the Benedictines, and they had a house in Indianapolis, and the prior was Father Bernardine. And so we went from folk mass to the gospel choir, and we ended up with 2 or 3 choirs, and you had Father Joseph Bell and all, and it was a great time in the church. In fact, it gave African Americans a sense of belonging in the church. And the thing about the whole thing that a lot of people misunderstood is that most black Catholics, African Americans, were already acquainted with all the gospel songs because they played them on the radio. Many of the Baptist churches and so on had speakers on the front of the church and sung them. And many of the African American families had mixed marriages. One of the parents, either your father or mother, was a Protestant, and your dad was Catholic. So we were pretty familiar. We were kind of like Black Catholics were a minority within a minority. The majority of my friends and people I knew were Baptist or Presbyterian or something. So, but we knew their music, and they had Vacation Bible School and things like that, and we often attended the Vacation Bible School so we could eat lunch with them. So, but bringing that into our church was a welcome sign, because that was music that inspired African American Catholics, and so on. It spoke to us. Having the Benedictines come in and giving a sense of black awareness, that black had a certain expression within the church. In fact, there was a theme called Free in the Spirit. And so our form of worship and everything we knew it was acceptable to us, but it was also acceptable to the larger church, the universal church. It was our expression of how we worshiped in the Mass. And also we were able to meet a lot of, because the Benedictines were there, we met a lot of black clergy. Father Bell made it possible for us. It seems like at that time the black sisters were beginning to coalesce together. Black Sisters Conference, and then the black clergy and the black lay people and so on. We're all beginning, right around that period of time, we're all beginning to come together to express their voice of things that they felt needed to be in terms of sustaining black people within the church and keeping black people in the church. And not only evangelizing new people in the church, but just trying to maintain, keep the people in the church from, because we were a minority within minority, from going other places and so on. So it was a great time in the church, and we through the Sisters Conference, Sister Pat Haley and all of them, we organized the Louisville Office of Black Catholics, and basically what we were trying to do is support black expression within the church, and black participation in terms of the laity, and just trying to sustain the identity of Catholicism within the African American community. And during this period of time, we had a great sense of what the church could do. You know, they had universities, they had Bellarmine, they had Spalding, my children were born at St. Joseph Hospital, and they had a lot of things they did, but they just didn't focus on the interest in it. It didn't seem they focused the interest in the black community until the civil rights movement, and then black awareness hit the church and so on. So, and at that time, also, as you say, Vatican II came about, where we could worship where the altar was turned around, where the priest was facing us. And that was very, something that was very open to African American people. Many of them many of the people, and many of the visitors came in the church came from the experience of the Protestant Baptist churches, where the pastor faced people and spoke in the common language of the people and so on. So it was our thinking at the time that we would be able to evangelize much easier than have the priests, where it was in the pre-Vatican II, where the priest had his back to the people, and the prayers were in Latin and so on, and even the choir music was in Latin. And so, even when that was going on, whenever even we brought friends or relatives to the church who were not Catholic, they felt estranged. Well, what are they saying? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? But when after Vatican II, and with the civil rights movement, arrival of the civil rights movement, it was much easier for people to come from our families who were not Catholic, our visitors come to the church. They could understand what was going on and kind of accept things. So we also we went up to Father Bell, made it possible for the group that was in this group here that was in the Office of Black Catholic to go to Detroit. They had one of their first Black Catholic conventions in Detroit. And we met Black Catholics from around the country who were expressing the same desire and the same feelings about the church and so on. And so we were trying basically to advance the cause of the church in terms of getting the message of the good news out to everybody. And we were trying to put people on notice that the Catholic Church is the complete church. It has the sacraments, and it has all the tools that can help get you your salvation and so on. So we were trying to, rather than to abandon it, we were trying to use this as a tool to open the church up to the broader community and so on. So it was a great time in the church at that time. Yeah, well, it was probably about, on this picture, it's about, in this group here, it's about 9 or 10 people on this group, but it was probably about 15 or 20 of us went up to Detroit to the convention. And the we learned that not only were regular members experiencing a little alienation in the church, and there was some difference in terms of how we operated and what our needs were in the larger community. But we also learned that that was also true for the African American nuns and also the African American clergy. And so we saw that when they came together, they were able to share stories and to kind of give each other strength and so on, and then go back to their individual areas and keep things going. And so it was not just us here in Louisville feeling a certain way, but we found that there was a common feeling among people across the country in terms of the African American community. So when I mentioned alienation, I meant that during this era, the civil rights movement was in play. And not only was the civil rights movement in play, but also the alienation also meant that when we had opportunities, when they passed fair housing laws and stuff, we had opportunity to move into other parish areas, people would leave. And so that we felt, why is that? When we moved into the Holy Cross parish, when we moved to the Holy Cross neighborhood, Holy Cross had 1 Mass on Saturday and 3 on Sundays. And then as we moved in and so on, it was all reduced down. It was always a question of who the pastor was going to be, whether we can afford the expenditure of the building and all this things like this. And also we were alienated from the larger Christian community from the standpoint of, why are you in the church? Why are you in the Catholic Church? How did it happen that you ended up in it? So you always had to explain why you were in the Catholic Church. It was different. It was, like I said, was minority within a minority. And so, and of course, again, that was that wasn't a feeling around the country, but that was a feeling in the Louisville area and so on. And so, and basically, by banding together with the initiative of the nuns and the priests and the lay people all coming together and expressing the concerns, how can we make the church better? You know, and then we got, we had some very outspoken nuns and priests, and I recall when they went to the Vatican and talked to the Pope about concerns of the African American Church in Louisville, and at that time the College of Cardinals didn't really have that on their agenda as an issue and so on. And eventually it ended up where when I was coming up in the church, I only knew of one African American bishop, 2, Bishop Howes in Jackson, Mississippi, and Bishop Perry out of New Orleans, only in the whole country out of that. And so, but now, because of the movement and because of concerns and expressions and working, being in coalition, the laity and the priests and the nuns, now there are about 30 African American bishops around the country. And then we have one archbishop, maybe 1 or 2 archbishops. In fact, the latest one was Wilton Gregory, who's Archbishop of Washington, D.C. He just installed as the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. So African Americans are moving up in the hierarchy of the church too, and then they can express concerns of the African American community on how to make it grow and so on. So the local Louisville Office of Black Catholic was basically supporting, trying to help support and sing and be in sync with what the Benedictines were trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish, the free expression and worship in the church, and say this is okay. It can be done this way as long as we have offertory consecration and communion, so on. And so that's what they were about. This is a photo I have of the entree of the Black sisters coming into the parish, into the city of Louisville. This is on the right side here is Sister Patricia Haley, and then her companion was Sister Barbara Houston. And I think they came from different orders. Sister Pat was a Sister of Charity. Sister Barbara, maybe from a different order, but they brought a lot of energy, and they gave us encouragement and training, and then they introduced us to a number of other Black clergy and religious people, Black priests, Black nuns. And in 1972, this article here is this was a little program. It was about 400 or 500 Black sisters convened at Spalding University. And our organization, the Louisville Office of Black Catholic, we kind of helped to host them. We helped to prepare for this conference and get it together and so on. The conference was at Spalding. We helped put the program together and try to help identify the speaker and so on. Just things that we could do to support their activities because the sisters were coming from around the country. And currently I belong to two organizations that also have a similar mission, the Knights of Peter Claver, and their mission is to support the local parish, and it's a historically Black fraternal organization, but it involves the Knights, the ladies, your junior Knights, and your junior daughters. There's about somewhere between 18 and 20,000 members in about 30 states. And in Louisville here, we have 3 councils, one at St. Martin de Porres, one at St. Augustine. The oldest one is at St. Augustine, Council 58. And then we have one at Immaculate Heart. And out in the state of Kentucky, we have one at St. Monica's. We have one up in Lebanon, at St. Augustine in Lebanon, and then one over in Lexington at St. Peter Claver. So I belong to the Knights Peter Claver, and I also belong to the Knights Columbus, which I joined since I've been going over to St. Louis Bertrand. And they both kind of organized similar. The Knights Columbus is much larger, has much more resources. Knights Columbus has almost 2 million members worldwide. So my thing with the Knights Columbus was they have a longer outreach. They for example, when the Pope came here, Knights Columbus and the Knights Peter Claver put money in to share to sponsor the Pope here. But a good bulk of it came from the Knights Columbus because they have 1.8 million members, and they have they have organization worldwide. So it's a longer reach. You can deal with worldwide issues. You can deal with disasters and stuff around the country. They can reach much farther. Knights Peter Claver is still focusing on building the local community up, the local church, and so on. And so they're both good organizations. So, but those things are things that I belong to that are still involved in trying to spread the good news, trying to help evangelize. And both organizations do a lot of good work. I go up to the Franciscan shelter with the Knights Columbus about 3 or 4 times a year. And with the Knights Peter Claver, we our last project, we did a backpack project when school started. We gave out about 500 or 600 backpacks to children in the neighborhood and so on like that. And we just don't have as much resources as Columbus do, but we do what we can. Uh, One activity that was we were involved in the parish level has been very inspirational to me and my wife was the Catholic Charities refugee and resettlement activities. At that time, Father Patrick Delahanty was a director of refugee resettlement, and he was challenging the parishes to get involved and support uh, uh, the refugees that were coming in, activities of the refugees were coming in. He called me one time and said that he had a Vietnamese family that had arrived. They had about, I think it was 7 to 8 kids, but there were 2 boys in the family that were the same age, and they looked a little different. And I think they went through their records and everything, and had some concerns about whether they were getting an accurate story on the family and their identity and so on. So I went to some training at Catholic Charities. It was about, seems like it was 3 or 4 week training, and how to be a mentor. And at the end of that period of time, they bought the mentee. My mentee was a young fellow, looked like he was about 20 years old, named San Vu from Vietnam. And I had been to Vietnam, had some experience in Vietnam, and they were living down off Algonquin Parkway. So my wife and I, usually when I encountered or went around to visit, usually my wife was involved with me, and she would say, "Let's go visit the family. Do you know where they live?" and so on like that. And we went down to visit the family. They were a new family in the city, and part of our training was to orientate them to the city, learn to show them how the public transportation worked, where the university hospital was located, take them on a little tour of the free public library, things that they could access to build a little quality in their life and so on. And Son, as I went to visit him, I went to his workplace. He worked at Cardinal Uniform out there off of 7th Street. And got reports from his supervisor saying that he was an excellent employee and so on. And I went to visit his family, and when I went to visit the family, he was never be there down there off of Algonquin Parkway near Winkler. And so I asked his mother, I said, "Well, where does he hang out at?" And she said he hangs out at the Americana Apartments. So when I went to the Americana Apartments, and they gave me a number, and I knocked on the door, and the first thing I noticed, it was 3 or 4 other Vietnamese there, but they were about my complexion. They were considered to be Amerasian. And so San was hanging out with them. And so and he felt closer to them than the purported family that he came with. And so I took him to the West End, a tour of the West End, took him around the barber shops and things that I thought that he might need in the future, places he might need to be familiar with and so on. So he felt, after a period of time, he felt close enough to me that he told me that that was really not his family, but that somehow or another there was some kind of deal going on over in Vietnam where they would, a family that had money, they could attach an Amerasian to the family, and that would be a cause for them to get into the United States. And in other words, the Amerasian usually had an American father, and so on. So when they in the war, they just kind of automatically said, and they were discriminating. I learned they were discriminating against the Amerasians in Vietnam, mixed kids, uh, and so they were automatically. Yeah, I think the president and all of them set up a policy where they were kind of automatically admitted into the United States. And so there were families attaching themselves to these kids and getting into the country. And so he kind of eventually broke away from that family and was living on his own out near the Americana with the other Amerasians. And he did well for himself. And I just went out to visit him one time on his workplace, and he said, "Well, Mr. David, I'm be leaving. I got some friends up in Michigan someplace, and I'm gonna leave my job and so on." And he left here, and went to Michigan. But we continued to visit the other family. I recall my wife. They had, I think it was Thunder over Louisville or some kind of fireworks show downtown. She took the kids down to the fireworks show. We used to go out and take them places around and so on like that. Mm-hmm. And so, but we finally kind of lost contact with the family after a certain point. After my experience with the Vietnamese family, we got another call at the church where Catholic Charities was trying to get the parishes involved. And at that time, I had a friend of mine who I worked at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I had a friend named that Melvin Bethel had retired, and he went to work for Catholic Charities. And while he was at Catholic Charities, he called me and said, "I have a family that's coming in, and they're from Haiti, and it looks like they are Catholic." And he was interviewing them and so on. And so I think we got a call from someone at the Catholic Charities also, say, "Would you sponsor the family?" Which means, sponsoring means you kind of embrace them, go visit them, and just check, see how they are. They're coming into a new country, and just anything you can do to help them out. So we formed a little committee at the church, and they gave us a little profile on how many would be in the family, and the ages of the kids, and how many boys and how many girls and so on. So we were expecting the family, and we were gathering furniture, clothing, things like that. I mean, they didn't give us a criteria what we needed to do, but we just anticipated these are things that they would need. And what we found out also, that in the beginning, Catholic Charity would provide them with housing for a short period of time. So, but they needed food, and they needed things to go in the housing, clothes for the children and stuff like that. And that's what we were kind of preparing for. And this family here was the first family that came over. This young guy's name was Enrique Henry. And I think he had 6 children, I believe it was. And he was at that time, this young guy, he and his wife, and they came from Akin, Haiti. And so we were really excited at the church. We felt like we talked about the fact that even the people who are in need come with gifts, because they come with the spirit of their religion. They're Catholic, and and it was kind of like our obligation, and we were really happy that we had been given the invitation to respond. I think we were probably one of the first parishes that got involved in it. And so we went out and met them at the airport, and this is a picture here where my wife is presenting a small bouquet of flowers to Enrique's wife, Josette. And up here we had a sign, welcoming them in. And when they came in, it was probably 20 people from our parish there to meet them. And we followed them to the assigned house that they were to go into, and we had a meal fixed for them and everything. And of course, our first experience was that the way we prepped the food and everything, it wasn't the way they liked it, the way they ate the food and stuff. But the women worked real hard to put all this food together, and then they kind of stared at it and they tasted it a little bit. That was the first learning lesson we had. But we were glad to just be able to help people who were in worse shape than what we were. And so that was a great experience. I think we worked with Enrique's family until he got on his feet. We probably tracked him for 3 or 4 years, and he moved around quite a bit. My wife at the time I was retired from federal housing for U.S. Department of Housing. She worked for housing partnership, which dealt with housing. So we talked a lot of housing stuff. And she was able to get them on the waiting list at the housing authority. And in the meantime, when the voucher ran out with Catholic Charities, they moved over on Jefferson Street and about 25th and Jefferson. And we went over there a number of times. They were told in their training, in their introduction at the American Life, you have an emergency, you call 911. And so every time they didn't understand something, they called 911. Every time we went over there, a fire truck was out in front of the house. You know, it was always something going on, you know. And so we learned a lot too, you know. And we collected a lot of the clothing. We had a deacon in our parish, Deacon Frederick Higgins, and he gave him a sewing machine. And for us, it was a great experience because we felt like we were doing Jesus' work. You know, we were doing things that we were his hands, in other words. Mm-hmm. And over the years, that experience, along with, then shortly after Henry came in, we got him settled in. Then another Haitian family, the Beausejour family, Dominique Beausejour came, and he had 6 or 7 kids, and we went through the same routine with him. Both families, still in the parish, still involved. And some of the issues that we had when we brought Enrique's family in, everybody was pretty excited about it. When we brought Dominique's family in, people started questioning, can we handle it? You know, we all in need too, so can we handle, you know, but one of the things that we saw in the group was they would create a sense of community among themselves. They spoke the same Creole language. But there were people in the parish who kind of questioned our judgment in bringing in a second family, and they were suggesting, they said that maybe the Beausejour family, maybe go down the Holy Christ the King, spread them around. And so they actually made arrangements for Dominique Beausejour's family to go to Christ the King, and he stayed down there for about 2 weeks and decided he wanted to come back to Martin de Porres because of Enrique Henry's family, the other Haitian family, and they wanted to be together. And so, but what we have learned from that is that they came bringing gifts too. Both of those guys. We have a third Haitian family, the Felix family is there, and they have a large group of kids, but they came in from another state. But all of those guys are very spiritual. And Dominique joined the Knights of Peter Claver. Enrique is in the Knights of Peter Claver now. Dominique is deceased, but Enrique is in the is currently in the Knights of Peter Claver. and Joseph Felix is in the Knights Peter Claver, and they are very up on Bible studies, and they can quote scriptures and Bible, and they infuse us with the Spirit in the way they pray and their spirit of worship and so on. So, and not only that, but all of those people that have come in have had large families. So we were trying to build up the enrollment in the church and bring people in the church. These are people who already understood the religion. You didn't have to convert them anything, and they had large families. Their kids are still involved in this. Anna-Reed's kids are still involved in the church. Dominic's kids are still involved in the church and take leadership. Dominic's daughter, Doris Bosasia, is very active in working in the church and so on. And Joseph's youngest sons and so on, they are on the altar and stuff at church. So it's been a gift to the parish and so on. So I think that nullified and neutralized the people who felt like we financially we couldn't afford the stress of sponsoring these different. But not only that, we had from this we have sponsored families from Sudan. We have about 3 families in the church from Sudan. And I think it was just last fall, we had a family come in from the Congo, and they had 10 kids, and they were sponsored in by not Catholic churches, but by the other. There's another Kentucky Refugee Ministries, and they resettled them on 34th in Kentucky, not far from the church. And then somehow or another, the guy, he was Catholic, and he found his way to the church on his own. He saw the building, and he started coming and bringing his family and so on. So we have about 3 families from the Congo, and even before they came in, we have families that have came to the church and have now moved on out to other parts of the city, and they go to churches in other locations, but they live out near Indian Trail, Preston Highway, and places like that, and so they go to churches in other locations. But it's real. But people have learned from that experience that it's been a real blessing to the church. This whole refugee and migration program, and the people that have come in have obtained housing through Habitat for Humanity. They have their own homes and so on, and doing great works. They're working in the health center and working in different places. One guy, he's from Liberia in the church. Eric Coranto, he's from Liberia. He's a cabinet maker. So they are not really a burden. It's been a blessing to the church, and I think that kind of educated the leadership of the church and the parishioners of the church. So that was one of the groups that we've been involved in, or have been involved in the past, that's been a real inspiration to us. Our value is first, like I said, I think I put God first, and then to involve yourself and use your skills and talents, and do all that you can to achieve. We used to tell them all the time, shoot for the stars. And I give all the credit to my wife on my children's education, because I was 2 things. I was involved in the church a lot, but I also always was concerned about making enough money to pay the bills. And so she was the real inspiration behind the places they went, where they went to schools and so on. And the church itself played a big role. I recall when my two sons graduated from St. Xavier High School, when we started out, we had one son going to school at Bishop David out on Dix Highway, which is now Holy Cross. And the other one was my son and daughter, other son and daughter is in elementary school at St. James on East Barstown Road. And when St. James, we found out was a feeder school to St. X. So when my son got to the 8th grade at St. James, the recruiters from St. X came over and wanted to know if he was interested and so on. And then they approached him, and then Brother Eddie Driscoll called me and said, we'd like to have your son in our school as a student. But I said, well, I really can't afford it. We got a son, his oldest brother's at Holy Cross, and we can't hardly pay for that. And he said, well, come on out and talk to me. And he said, if you put both boys in St. X, we'll give you 2 for 1. So again, the church worked. So I ended up sending both of them. They did well. And like I told them, we explained to them, you got one shot deal. Don't play around. Take it seriously. You got one shot to get through. If you mess up, you can't recover. You're going to have to go out and get a job someplace, at Ford, GE, or somewhere. And so they took advantage of it and went through and got scholarships. We put them in the Chestnut Street YMCA Black Achiever program. And they were in the Lincoln Foundation program with Dr. Sam Robinson. He was a director of the Lincoln Foundation, so we had them in both programs at the same time, all 3 of them. And our goal there was because of the fact that they had been at St. X and my daughter went to presentation, so we wanted them to share the sense of Black community and Black experience that we had. So we put them in a Black Achiever program where they could meet other Black kids and so on. And they did well there and won scholarships through the Black Achiever program and the Lincoln Foundation program, and done well for themselves. And the big thing is, with us, they all have a sense of whose child they are. They not only our children, but God's children. They all, as far as we can tell, they all pray and put God in a proper perspective. And so that part, we're proud of that. And but this is my family, and I, like I said, I give 110% of my success with my family to my wife, because I was always busy, involved with other things. And even when I was involved with the church, it was like something that I wanted to do, an extracurricular activity, something that I wanted to do, and so on. So she guided the kids, and then I would support her.